Council has committed.
To turn public radio off. I thought we were running public radio over the meeting for a second, and I realized I still had it running on my computer. Looks like it's 6 o'clock. So we should probably convene this special meeting of the City Council for February 10th, 2021. And with that, we'll get to the very first item on the agenda, City Clerk, which is public comments, I think, unless there's anything else we need to address before that. City Clerk.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was just looking at these notes. If you'd like me to read the notice for special meeting, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, we can do that before public comments. That's great.
Notice is hereby given that a special meeting of the Laramie City Council will be held Wednesday, February 10th, 2021 at 6 o'clock p.m. via Zoom webinar ID 84301392774, passcode 027899, at City Hall, Council Chambers, 406 Ivinson Avenue, Laramie, Wyoming, for the following purpose. Number 1, original ordinance number 2021, amending various sections of Title 15.14.040 of the Laramie Municipal Code regarding citywide parking standards on second reading, introduced by Somerville. And number 2, original ordinance number 2023, amending various sections of Title 15.08.1514 of Laramie Municipal Code regarding downtown commercial zoning district regulations, introduction and first reading.
Thank you, City Clerk, for the notice of the special meeting. And we are going to, for this meeting, pass over some of the formalities simply because it is a special meeting without objection. I will say this, we will of course have the public comment period like we always do. For anyone that's here to join us for the public comment this evening, I just want to make a couple of quick remarks so that we can all be on the same page. We don't and will not be using the question and answer format that's available for participants tonight. In future meetings, it won't be available. We won't be using it tonight. If you have a comment, we'd ask you to raise your hand using the feature at the bottom of the screen if you're attending on Zoom with your computer or your phone. If you don't have an option on your device to do that, if you're just on the phone, I believe is it *67 to try to request a comment, City Clerk, if you're just using your phone?
Mr. Mayor, if you're just on your phone, if you do *9, it will raise their hand for them. *6 will unmute them on the phone.
So *9 to raise the hand if you're just using the phone, and *6 to be able to speak so that we can all hear you when you're recognized for a public comment if you choose to make one. We won't be using any of the other features besides the raising of the hand and those features that we just discussed on the phone. And the primary reason for that is there is a need and a requirement for the City Council and the City Government of Laramie to preserve those comments for the public record. And right now, the format that we need those comments to be received is in one in which it can be recorded. And the typewritten question and answer portion does not lend itself to that right now. And so we need folks to just go ahead and verbally make those comments to us so they can be recorded for the public record. And I'm sorry to take time for that reminder, but it is important. And we do appreciate everyone's patience, and we're glad if you've joined us to add any of your own input to our process through public comment. City Clerk, do we have anyone now or that signed up before?
We had one for one of the topics, but as far as non-agenda related items, I didn't have anyone sign up ahead of time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, City Clerk. And of course, that disclaimer, if you want to call it that, which I once again apologize for the length of it, that will apply to the public comment on agenda items as well. So seeing no public comment on non-agenda items, and looks like all of our folks are here, let's go ahead and go into the item, which is going to be introduced by the individual that read it in last time, Councilor Somerville, for original ordinance number 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And before I do that, do we need to do a roll call for a special meeting?
It's not on the agenda, but let's do it. Thank you, Councilor Somerville. Excellent point of order. City Clerk?
Cumby.
Oh, it is on the agenda.
Present.
Gabriel.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
O'Doherty.
Here.
Schuster. Absent. Stelter.
Sorry, here.
Somerville.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
That's 8 present and 1 absent, Your Honor.
All right. And City Clerk, I apologize. Of course, you'd have the roll call on the agenda just because I don't see it. And thank you, Councilor Somerville, for the point of order. As usual, the chair is looking at the Zoom screen and the agenda simultaneously on one monitor, and it's not super great. All right, let's go ahead and get into the special meeting. And Councilor Somerville, if you want to go ahead and bring that item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And before I make the motion, just for the benefit of the public, we're not moving this. The motion will not be to move it to approve it on second reading, but move to open it for discussion and public comment, since it is postponed to date certain February 16th. So with that, I would move to approve discussion and receive public comments on original ordinance number 2021.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded for discussion. Thank you, Councilor Harrington, for the second for discussion. And we are ready now for anyone from staff for introductory remarks.
Chair and Commission, or Mayor and Council, we're a different group tonight. Thank you. I'm gonna kick us off tonight just a little bit on just a recap essentially on the parking discussion. So just as a reminder for the council and then any of the members of the public. So what we're talking about for this first item is citywide parking numbers and standards. This isn't related to the downtown parking discussion that I think will come at the next item. So just for some clarity there. So as a recap, we've got a citywide parking standard amendments coming forward. And if I was to break it down into two main sections, we have a section that we're looking at the actual parking numbers. Those are found in the table that's attached to the ordinance. And what we're looking at is a parking reduction. We're going to be asking people to provide less parking with developments and requirements in terms of housing and commercial. So both sides of the coin there. In addition, we've got some text changes that are included in the ordinance, kind of more in the body of the ordinance. And we've got some basic cleanups. You know, there's some shalls that should have been used and things like that. We're going to be with two other pretty major changes, which would be allowing for a parking study to occur to really zero in on parking numbers on uses, and as well as changing the maximum number of parking spaces permitted with some percent changes in a section there. So you know, to summarize, you know, you've got two sections: parking numbers and kind of some of these text changes. So then to kind of, you know, further the conversation in terms of where we're at, the broad context of these is to try to approach how do we better use the land and the land use within our community. Parking is one of those ways to tackle that. And one of those things that we're seeing within the community is we're seeing some of our parking lots kind of remaining empty. And so if we can provide an option and try to really zero in on the number of parking spaces that these properties really actually need, we do open up development potential for for the existing property owners and new property owners that may come in and look to do developments for more use in the on the land. And so kind of thinking about what does this mean? We've seen they're included in your materials that were provided to you, multiple support letters for parking reductions from this community. We have a letter from the Laramie Chamber Business Alliance and the CDLC who wants to see the parking numbers reduced. Our consultants, the Retail Coach, who is the group that is working with the city of Laramie in terms of retail recruitment, acknowledges this is a good move for the community in terms of economic development. It's going to help developers develop their property, and it's going to reduce costs. Second, the Community Builders Organization, they're the ones that have been working with the city of Laramie on housing goals and housing initiatives. They pretty much echo the same thing. It's going to reduce costs on development. It's going to allow for more use of the property. We also note that it's what we heard during our housing discussions within the community is that if we didn't have to provide as much parking, we could probably provide units at a lower cost. The other thing that I would note is within the materials, I provided you 4 pages of a document, 4 pages of a draft document that we have not quite completed, but we are so very near close to completing. One is the code audit. This is something that I know council's kind of waiting to see. In that document is materials that's going to provide us some guidance on the broader context of zoning and housing. But one of the things you'll see in the sections that I highlighted within that document is the Community Builders Group has noted that parking is one of the main hurdles and main barriers to providing affordable housing. If you can adjust that number and reduce some of that impact that parking creates on housing, you can adjust housing affordability within your community and provide different types of styles of housing and things like that. You'll also see in those is that it reduces costs. You're seeing that sentiment through all these support letters. And then we today forwarded on some other support letters from an individual and his multiple companies that support those as well. And so what I really want to kind of come back to is, we do have this broader scope of using parking as one way to try to help the economic development aspects of our community, and that they don't have to provide as much parking. It doesn't cost them as much to construct it. And what we hope is that it allows them to build more on their property and have more uses, have another shop. And so with that, I'm going to kind of end my portion of this discussion. One last thing. During some of the previous meetings, we know that we've heard just some basic conversations about maybe individual uses, not quite seeming like you were comfortable with that. Remember, we can amend and make recommendations to amend some of these individual uses within that table and not necessarily throw everything out because 1 or 2 uses might not seem palatable for the council. And so what I would say to that is, making sure that we discuss those items so that we can have that conversation about what maybe is the appropriate number if the numbers that we've put in here doesn't feel right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew. He's got a couple items that I think he's going to touch on, and then I think we'll open it up for some discussion and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cheney.
Mayor, council members, just wanted to go over a couple things. One, related to what Derek just talked about. If you see on the front of your cover sheet, we added 2 some of the kind of amendments they already was talking about in the first reading, and one was adding dormitory to educational facilities, just to kind of protect the city in case the university does in the future develop dormitories. And we added one for each unit and one visitor space spot per every 10 units, which is the same as the dwelling multifamily. And then the other is basically splitting section 13, having attachment A for residential and then attachment B for everything else, which is commercial, industrial, restaurants, retail, etc. Other than that, I just really wanted to reiterate some of what Derek said, but talking about the main theme of these changes is economic development, as well as efficient land use. And with the carbon neutral goal for 2050 for the city of Laramie, the parking, while it doesn't seem connected, clustering businesses together, bringing them closer, easier access for people to approach multiple businesses that are hopefully closer to denser neighborhoods. This is a very efficient way to use land use. It cuts down on travel times and frankly, a lot of unwanted maintenance costs possibly for the city. But with that, I am here for any questions that council may have.
Good. I'm going to go to the city clerk. Oh, sorry, Nancy, I can't hear you.
Mr. Mayor, on the motion, we didn't do roll call or unanimous consent. I was just rolling forward with unanimous consent, but Attorney Southard pointed out that we didn't vote on actually opening up for discussion. Would you like me to do a roll call on the motion?
Yep.
Cumbie?
Yes.
Gabriel? Gabriel? Absent? Harrington?
Yes.
O'Doherty?
Yes.
Schuster?
Yes.
Stalder?
Yes.
Somerville?
Yes.
Pierce?
Yes.
Weaver?
Yes.
That's 8 yeses, 0 noes, and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Retroactive motion to open discussion on the item is here. I think that probably slipped because it's a discussion only item. Thank you very much. So that motion carries, and we were looking around for discussion, and I thought somebody had already from council had already indicated that they wanted to speak, but maybe I'm mistaken. All right, well, if folks are going to be shy, I'll kick us off, and I have a question for Mr. Teeny. And I want to make sure that I heard this correctly in his opening thoughts that he shared with us. Mr. Teeny, did I follow you correctly? You're talking about there's a direct relationship and interaction between parking and total lot sizes and setbacks for residential properties?
Mayor and council, so I think you might have misheard. I don't think I mentioned anything about setbacks, but parking and housing are tied together in terms of affordability.
Yeah.
Because the reality is the more, when you have a property that has multiple units on it and they're providing parking, parking takes up a lot of square footage, ground square footage specifically. And often the ground square footage of a parking lot is most of the times the limiting factor in whether you get, let's say, 3 units versus 5 units on a property. And so what you'll see in the materials from community builders, but also the discussions that we've had over time regarding housing, is that one way to combat that and try to provide additional housing numbers, units, styles, types within the community is by reducing the amount of required parking. If you do that, the developer simply has more space on the lot to build units, and that's the correlation that I was putting together there.
Thank you very much. That clarifies it for me. I wasn't certain if I had heard you making a point about changes to parking, allowing more flexibility in terms of lot sizes, even for single family homes or R1 style developments. But I think you've addressed that. Not right now. That's not something we're talking about. We're just talking about a very basic relationship between the space that you devote between the two types of things. And I've got some more questions, but I see Councilor Harrington up, and I'm going to recognize Councilor Harrington.
Thanks for letting me interrupt, Mr. Mayor. Derek, I think one of the things I'm struggling with on this is I feel like it's more targeted towards increasing affordability in sort of the multifamily development. Anecdotally, because I don't have any, I think we might all share this anecdotal feeling, but Laramie is not largely made up of people purchasing apartments. I feel like the majority of those are rentals, which my sense is that will be largely driven by the price of every other rental in town rather than the development price as a purchase would be. I am curious how this might, in your mind, interact with more of that R1 style, that single family home development, because I feel my sense is that is the home quality and or size and type that we're really lacking in Laramie. That's the ones that when they go on the market, they sell in a few hours. You don't often see apartments for sale unless it is the entire apartment building for sale. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I've been just trying to really solve this part of it because I think that weighs into my decision on how to support this or what portions I might support.
Go ahead, Mr. Cheney or
Yeah.
Mr. Potts.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I think I'd say, first off, I think the residential component is only one component of the discussion. Remember, we're talking another 150 uses in the commercial table that will have a broader, probably more noticeable effect than I think most of your residential reductions. When we talk about single family homes, right now we're only requiring one space per dwelling unit anyway. And so really our parking numbers are already very minimal for single family homes. And that would apply generally to think like a duplex or maybe like a townhome situation where maybe you have 2 or 3 units attached next to each other. As you start to go into the larger buildings, so anything really probably 3 to 4 units and above is where you're going to see the ability of a developer to put 4 units on the property or 5 or 2, and parking plays a role in that, just that space allocation. And so your impact on those units are going to be greater in terms of you will increase the number of units in the market. And short term, this doesn't solve the whole problem of housing, the housing need that we've talked about for the last 3 years in the community. It's one aspect that will help us get further down the road. To be honest, the parking too is going to be more of a long haul in terms of seeing results. What you'll have is a situation where maybe more people can come into the market and more developers can come into the market and provide alternative housing styles because some of the parking has been reduced, so the cost for the project has been reduced. And over time, if we have more units, you should see a more balanced market when it comes to different types of affordability levels in housing. But also remember, this also provides for the ability for maybe someone that is doing high-end apartment complex, let's say, to still provide other types of housing at a different price point. And so, you're right. You're not going to, it's not like tomorrow, the first person that builds something that we're going to see prices drop across the community. It's based on the numbers that we have in our community, we're dramatically deficient in a number of types of housing units, kind of in that 3 unit to 10 unit range. And we've got a lot of catch up to do. So I don't think we're going to see an immediate switch with just one element, which parking is just one element of that.
Thank you, Mr. Denny.
Councilor Harrington, did that get to your question?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, it does. I mean, I think to some extent, I'm still concerned about, I don't know that this is, my feeling is that I don't know if this is really a good tool for affordable housing. I understand what you're saying about it. It does make apartment or commercial development more affordable for a developer. Maybe I'm cynical. I don't know that the developer is going to pass that savings on. I hope they will. But I'm not sure that it sort of hits the mark for what is the most crucial need in our community. And I think that is the single family home or the smaller home.
Thank you, Councilor Harrington, and council members and staff. Given the way we've set these meetings up, I intend for people to be able to follow up and get in depth on these questions and discussion this evening. Mr. Cox, I saw that you had indicated you might want to add to that answer, and then Councilor Schuster, I see you next. If you'd like, Mr. Cox, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I guess my part to that answer for Councilor Harrington's points is that I think the reason we are seeing such a high cost in rental properties such as apartments or even small cottage houses is that we haven't diluted the market at all, and that there is such a great need for it that people are forced to pay those high prices. And then when you offer a higher stock of housing, that's when people actually have choices and the availability to kind of actually pick and choose what they want rather than living in the basement of a house when you're a young professional in Laramie. And so I think that's what this allows, is that one, the land use allows for more units, but also that money that went to parking could go to extra units within a development. But that's, yeah, my point for it.
Appreciate that. That generates a couple of questions for me, but I've got Councilor Schuster up next.
Thank you very much. I know that not all houses are built the same, because I'm sure that this recommendation is for a townhouse house or something like that, just like you said, some of the smaller houses that are popping up in a lot of places, because I think about the average family is 1.8 child. I think that's kind of funny on a 0.8 child, but it means as they grow up and become teenagers, you may have up to 4 cars per that house. I have some friends right now that have a new townhome, and they have problems with the neighbors parking in front of theirs. The wind is blowing. They now have an icy sidewalk. They're now on not really good speaking terms. So I think parking is going to be an issue. And some of the things in this really kind of confused me. Besides townhomes, I see that there's only a half a parking place per motel room. That one kind of shocked me. Only 4 spots for a classroom at the university. That one kind of shocks me, because right now we have to have a parking ordinance for up to 6 blocks out on the university right now, because of people not even be able to park in front of their own houses. So I realize we're talking that eventually cars are going to change, and you can probably get your autonomous vehicle to drop you off the classroom building, and then it drives home and parks, and it comes back, picks you up when you're done with your class. But that's not here yet. I really feel we're approaching this way too soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. I am looking to the council for indications to speak, but I'm also looking at staff. If you want, should we get a few more questions and then you can respond to them as you'd like, or you want to do this one at a time? All right, I saw a couple of hands. I think it was Councilor Stalder, and then other council members, give me a hand if you did want it. All right, I'm going to go Councilor Stalder, Cumby, and O'Doherty. Council Member Stalder.
Thank you. I love the idea of decreasing this for commercial use, but I have a lot of concerns about residential. And I was wondering, just in light of our conversation last night about what's required for parking lots, if, let's say, for a fourplex and they had a parking lot, would they still be required to do landscaping? And I was just thinking, if you had a fourplex of like 3-bedroom apartments, under the current code, that would be 8 parking spots. And under the proposed code, it would be 4 parking spots. So now I understand if you had like a bunch of fourplexes, that would start to add up to space where you could build more units. But if you just had one, I don't think you can build another unit in the space of 4 parking spots. And I wonder, if you built that, if you would also have to have landscaping, and that might decrease your parking spaces on that end. It's just interesting to me that we talked about the landscaping last night and then decreasing parking to decrease the cost this time, when maybe we could just decrease the cost in the first place by getting rid of the landscaping requirements. That's all.
Thank you, Councilor Stalder. Why don't we go to Councilor? Okay, we'll go to Mr. Cox with no objection, so he can answer some of that question, if that's all right with the council members. Go ahead, Mr. Cox.
All right, thank you, Council, Mayor and Council. Just they were specific, so I figured it would be
That's fine
to go at. But for the fourplex, I think when we hear a lot of concerns about landscaping and the cost that comes with it, and a lot of times what we find is that the landscaping cost comes at the end of the project. But the main goal of this parking ordinance is to save money. And I'll tell you, through all the projects, 4 parking spaces is going to cost about 10 to 20 times more than the landscaping for the perimeter of 4 parking spaces. But the other fact is, I think it should be known that these parking spaces really do add up in size. Decreasing 4 parking spaces away from a place that might require 8, that is actually 720 square feet. And so that's a fine studio cottage unit that could go in that area. It does add up is kind of what I'm saying. And decreasing the amount of parking does add up in costs as well. But yeah.
We'll have an opportunity for folks to follow up as we go around. Councilmember Cumby.
I just wanted to express a couple of concerns. First of all, if we reduce parking for multifamily units, I'm concerned about the pressure that it begins to put on the residential neighborhoods that are already experiencing difficulties, especially in Ward 2, which is near the college. A second concern is that we do lack adequate public transportation, and then combined with our months of inclement weather, people are more prone toward driving than they might be walking or riding a bike during those winter months. And so I think that in these multifamily units, you can anticipate at least 2 cars per unit. And if we don't provide that parking, then where are they going to go? And a third concern that I have, if individuals are unable to park at their residence because of limited parking, I have a safety issue about that. And do we have like young women having to park a block or 2 from their residence and walking through that? That concerns me as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. Thank you for your patience, Councilmember O'Doherty. Go ahead.
So I sound like Miss Negative Nelly, but so I'm opposed to the ordinance all around. And one of the reasons is we still have adequate geography. We still have area here that's not developed. If that were getting close to where like all those lots on North Fourth were filled up and there was pressure, then I think it's worth considering. But I feel like it's too early. There are 43 changes in that table, and a lot of them give me heartburn, and I don't know how we get through such a big table in this format. I'd be more comfortable like one at a time and then striking it. And so an example of another thing that, like at city council, since I've been on city council in the last 2 years, every development that's gone in, all the complaints from the neighbors have been about parking and traffic. And it's Laramie, I have too many cars, I'm ashamed to say, but they serve different purposes. Some for doing construction things, some for going on river trips, and some for, getting around town. And I'm not the only one. Like all my neighbors have trailers with things on them, like snowmobiles and all of, like ATVs and camper trailers and things like that. They're all over Laramie. So I think it's unrealistic to think that we can reduce the number of parking spaces. And I think and every developer would prefer to not put in as many parking spaces as we require, because they don't want to spend more money. But the people that live here, I think most of them, we haven't had people coming to city council saying, you know what, I really don't. I think we have too much parking in Laramie. Could you reduce the parking in Laramie? It's quite the opposite. The public comments are usually complaining about parking around the university. So I don't think, and then making it a maximum. So we reduce the minimum required, and then that thereby reduces the maximum by quite a bit. So it used to be you could do 125 of the minimum, 125%, and now we're saying 110%. So now it's really reduced. So say you're a developer that wants to have a place that people can have their outdoor recreation toys in the parking lot. Now we're saying you can't even have enough spaces, even if you decided that was a good business model, because you want to attract the people that come here for their out of town recreation. So I don't understand how we can chip this ordinance. Like I was suggesting we look at, instead of residential versus business or commercial, that we look at the text of the ordinance and then pull that table out and consider that separately. That would be my suggestion. There's just too much in it, like beauty shops. What was the big concern on 4th and Clark? That was a beauty shop that didn't think that they had enough parking. So we're reducing what a beauty shop needs, when we know for a fact, because of all the public comment, that the beauty shop probably needs those spaces, and they, so that's where I stand. I'm just opposed to it. Sorry.
I apologize. Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. Vice Mayor Pierce. And then Councilor Gabriel, I see you.
Do you want me to wait and have Councilor Gabriel go, or should I?
No, I think you guys were in order, but he gave me the thumbs up. Go ahead, Vice Mayor, and then we'll go to Councilmember Gabriel.
So Mayor, my question is for Mr. Teeny. I think I heard you say early on that there was going to be a parking study. And I'm wondering about, and maybe I misheard that, but I'm wondering about the timeline of the parking study, what it all entails, and if we happen to be in line, because we're making determinations, or potentially making determinations prior to findings from the parking study, or maybe I just misheard that. So I guess I'd like a little clarification.
Go ahead, whoever's, Mr. Teeny, go ahead.
Mayor and Council. So what I was mentioning is the community builders, who has been the group working with the City of Laramie on housing related issues, is finalizing their drafts that are the studies related to housing needs and housing issues within the community. And what I try to do is give you a quick preview of those documents in those 4 pages that were provided in the staff report, which is parking is identified as one of a main barrier to housing within the community. And so that's the study and the information that I'm talking about in terms of housing and parking. So tying those two together. So.
Thank you, Mr. Tini. I was just thinking it may be a parking study forthcoming as opposed to findings from previous information. So thanks.
All right, Vice Mayor, thank you. Councilmember Gabriel, thanks for your patience. You have the floor.
You bet. Thank you. Well, a lot of the concerns of Councilor Schuster and Cumby were addressed in some of the questions that were posed a little bit earlier, but I was looking through attachment B, and I just don't understand how a rental or a motel unit can have 0.5 parking spaces. It doesn't make any sense to me, but maybe I can be convinced. Looking at multifamily dwelling, 1 for each unit, 1 visitor spot for every 10 units in attachment B. So when you look down through all of the facts and figures of that attachment, it just, looks like they're about cut in half. And still open for discussion on my part. Maybe Matt and Derek can convince me, but I have some concerns about some of these numbers in attachment B for sure. Thank you.
You bet, Councilor Gabriel, and I'll go to the planners since some of that was directed at a couple of things, and see who wants to address Councilor Gabriel's questions. Mr. Cheney, and then Mr. Cox, if you want to add anything afterwards, you'll be up right after that. Go ahead, Mr. Cheney.
Yeah, I'm guessing Matthew might have a few additional things, but I mean, so we've heard, a couple times already from Member Gabriel and Member Schuster on, hotels, like I mentioned early on, I think if hotels, if this is something that you're not comfortable with, we can bring back something different that's maybe more in line with what you're thinking, whether it's just back to 1 space for every single room or some other option. Within the whole of these, yeah, some of these maybe are a little bit progressive, trying to push the envelope, trying to really get them focused in on having just enough parking spaces. But if there's some things like hotels, then let's have that discussion and let's get that modified so that it is more in line with what the council's thinking, so that the remaining of these items can continue to move forward with, for instance, retail or whatever. Going to multifamily, right now what we're recommending is the one space for every unit, and then 1 visitor spot for every 10 units. We've heard from a couple members already that this multifamily or, any multifamily development and the pressures that multifamily development can pose on parking, it seems like a concern. So, if you look at what we have currently in the requirements, they're broken down by the number of bedrooms. And so for every 1 bedroom units, you have 1 space. You have 1.5 spaces for every 2 bedroom units, and then 2 spaces for everything in excess of that. We're seeing that it's, from a developer side of things, when they're looking at parking for multifamily housing, they take a look at these numbers. They're often providing a lot more parking than they feel like they need on the site. I think we've heard that, of course, a developer may say, hey, I don't want to provide parking, it's to reduce their costs. And I think what's hard is we can't guarantee through parking changes that a developer or property owner will transfer those cost savings onto the renters. We can't. There's no way to do that unless we have truly affordable housing requirements in this community. That being said, as Matthew noted earlier, the more stock that we can put on the market and allow the economy of rentals to occur, that can help. And so, I think for the council to consider is do we prioritize extra parking with multifamily, or are we willing to maybe adjust some of the parking numbers on whether it's multifamily or commercial to try to allow for some of the development to occur? And it's always a balance, with any regulation, there's always that balance and requirements and what that brings on the other side. And so I think I would leave it at that on that. But like I mentioned before, I mean, if there are specific uses, I think this is the time to talk about it so that at the next reading we can bring some options for council to consider that maybe are more in line with what you're thinking. So.
Thank you. Councilor Gabriel, did you have a follow-up, or are you okay for now?
No, that makes sense. I think some of these concerns that were brought up earlier by the other counselors, especially multifamily and motel, should be talked about and perhaps adjusted. Maybe not. Maybe everybody else is comfortable, but I have some concerns about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that is precisely why this particular topic is being given this amount of time. Councilor Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be brief. I want to be sure I'm leaving time for the public. I think so my wife and I lived in an apartment downtown for some time. In that circumstance, we lived there anticipating not parking in front of our building consistently. That was sort of the expectation for the location in which we were living. The perks outweighed the consequences of that decision, hands down. But I'm trying to consider that if I lived in a similar apartment somewhere else in town, maybe behind Ridley's or something like that, and if there wasn't sufficient parking there, it feels far more inconvenient, and the pros certainly start to be defeated by the cons. If I'm looking at parking down on Garfield Street and then walking up and around to my apartment building. So I think the location where these happen would matter a lot in my opinion. I'm not sure how to put that into code, but there are spots that not parking in front of the building is far less inconvenient. And I know that that's the intention in the long term, but what we're talking about is maybe pretty serious inconvenience for the next 25 years before we have sort of caught up to the code. And all of these places are more dense. I mean, I certainly support dense development, but I'm not I'm having a hard time distilling my my problems with this code revision. I'm having a hard time really drilling down on what the specific issue is. And to me, it's not like multifamily needs one more spot per bedroom. It's not something like that. Because I feel like it's so complex and flexible throughout the city that's why I'm struggling. And I'm not sure, Derek and Matt, if that helps you at all, but I'm just really trying to figure out where I'm coming from on it, where I'm struggling. And I'm not sure that's a question, and I apologize for that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's all right, Councilor Harrington. I'll just mention it again. This is an in-depth topic, and we're diving deep. We are going to go to the public pretty soon, but I see Mr. Planner Cox. Go ahead.
Mayor, Council, thank you. No, I think that's a good point. Just kind of the geographical challenges that come with multifamily, and I do realize that like the planning game is a very long time scale, generally on like 50, 100 year times, but we all wish this stuff could happen next year, but not how it works. And so I think with that, Derek, step in if you need, but I guess we have language like, for example, in the DC code that talks about how close a residential unit is to public parking. And so if, I think there's room to have some type of language maybe within like context to amenities or like Brian was saying, living downtown, you kind of trade the benefits off for parking in front when you can actually shop at a grocery store 2 blocks away or 5 blocks away, whatever. And so it does change that up. I don't know what that language is right now, but I think we could definitely do some research around what that might look like.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Cheney.
And I think to, to add to that, the geographical discussion about, what I'm hearing mostly is centered around residential. Okay. I'm hearing that across the comments, not necessarily related to commercial. Your geographic difference with commercial is it's all in the same place. I mean, it's on the same corridors. And so, when it comes to residential, as Matthew noted, I think definitely addressing the fact that, you could tie things to amenities, zoning districts potentially. So you could take a residential area and tie it to the zoning districts it's associated with. It would be a much more complicated amendment in terms of trying to find the best adjustment for, do you require more parking because it's closer to existing single family residential? Or if it's something, let's say a multifamily project in a commercial area, which is permitted within commercial areas, do we, does that allow for less or more? To me, that's a tough call because it could be so site specific. And so, as Matthew said, I mean, right now, just like on the fly, I don't have a good answer for you of like, is there a way to tailor that so that your geographical location helps dictate or adjust the amount of parking spaces you have? I mean, it definitely could be considered. I mean, there's probably a way to do it. So,
Sorry. Thank you. Mayor, Council. I think one other thing I just wanted to point out that, it hasn't really been part of the conversation through all of these parking standards is just the use of a parking lot. That is still very much permitted within the city. So the university, as we all know, they're trying to construct a parking garage at Grand and 10th. And so the use of just a parking lot connected to a structure, if it's on like a different lot or a entity such as the university or a school, is still permitted within our city, and doesn't have these same kind of codes tied to it. But thank you.
I'm going to ask a question because I think people are getting into their second rounds, and I've got a couple of things I want to ask if nobody objects. And I appreciate that Mr. Teeny kind of addressed this a little bit earlier. One thing that I'm struggling with is the balance between if this is going to help us with some of these affordable housing concerns. And I think Mr. Teeny was very straightforward with us about this, but one general issue I have with this is it seems pretty realistic to assume that you're not going to realize a lot of these savings on prices for potential buyers, homeowners, renters, until you reach that whatever that critical mass of housing market dilution is that was referred to earlier. So we could be going in this direction on parking that frankly community members haven't really reflected to us as something that they want to see, in the hopes that down the line we'll realize some of those positive benefits without really being able to know for sure, which of course we've had an honest discussion about that. But the other part of it that I struggle with is, even if we do get there, the timeline on that could be considerable. I mean, it could be quite a little while, maybe 10 years, maybe longer before we see some of those things. So that as a benefit of this approach seems a little risky and a little far out to then say to constituents in Laramie, yeah, we want to go with this, even though it might be a real hassle. That said, just kind of an overarching concern I have, I like where the discussion has started to go here towards towards the last few comments and answers, which is that possibly the approach needs to be to take a look at some fine tuning and targeting, and seeing if there's something to do there where we're keeping up with some best practices and preparation, but without taking the hard turn into it just yet with everything. I'm not sure. Maybe that's where part of this discussion is going. I have a question, and I think Mr. Tini, you can probably answer this. You talked about working with community builders and some of our other consultants that have come in and helped drive some of this process, talking about the impact of parking and reductions and requirements on what kind of development opportunities that creates. I wonder, was that also something that was touched on, at least in part or a little bit, by the larger economic development plan that we put into place last year? Has any of that helped us inform some of our decisions or ideas about parking, or is it primarily just the work that we've done with community builders?
Mayor and council, yeah, the economic development plan is another component of the discussion. So with the economic development plan, if you recall, housing was noted as a major barrier for economic development within our community because we simply don't have the housing stock and the housing types or the typology to provide options for new employers or existing employers to expand. What we're hearing is that when people are looking at our community and they can't provide housing or any type of housing really for that matter, sometimes for their employees that maybe are looking to relocate, it makes it a tough call for a employer to maybe site in Laramie when you can't provide quality housing for them. And so it was definitely, that's a large component in the economic development plan. And the work that community builders did was said, okay, how do we provide those multitudes of types of housing for the community? And this is, like I said, it's one aspect of the broader picture. And what I would say is that, like I said, I feel like I'm hearing housing, parking related to residential as being a large concern here. I'm hearing a few issues with maybe a few uses within the broader context of the commercial uses, but you know, the community builders work that we're going to be doing is going to be coming in the next couple months, and it's going to start with work sessions, presenting the information, and really trying to find out what is council's palatability on potential changes. And I'll give you a preview in terms of the parking that we're talking about today. It pales in comparison to the recommendations that we will probably see from community builders related to lot sizes, densities, changes that will allow for different types and styles of housing to be used. It could be a big change depending upon the directions we go. And so I guess what I would say is we felt tackling parking was a focused approach at just one aspect of a lot of different ways that we might try to tackle housing in the community. So what I would end in saying is that I feel like if housing is what's really dragging the discussion down, then there's always that option. We've kind of got this broken up into talking about attachment A and attachment B per member or Doherty's recommendation. I mean, we could always start talking about just one of these at a time, but also we could always talk about, do we consider housing in a couple months when we look at the community builders work and tie that all in together? It doesn't mean that we aren't going to talk about it probably, but maybe that provides even more context and a broader context to the discussion about the other pieces of the puzzle, not just housing. So,
Planner Tini, I think that might be a message to take away from this, is that on that issue, it might be better to holistically approach that, including things like parking when we talk about housing. But I appreciate the the answer to that question. We've heard from consultants in 2015 about the housing problem that you've alluded to tonight and that we've unpacked in some other discussions. We heard it again in the 2018 analysis from the State Business Council. We heard it from our economic development consultants in 2019. We know housing is a major barrier to economic development efforts in the community. I frankly have not been as aware of parking's relationship to that before we've started to have some of these discussions. And to be fully honest, I'm still a little skeptical of it. That's not a dig. That's just just an honest reaction here. I want to hear more about it, and I wonder if that might not be better addressed as part of a holistic discussion about what planning can do and what planning proposals might be out there to address it all at once. And as you said, not that we won't talk about it, but maybe when it becomes an actionable piece, it's tied in with some of the other things with housing. I'm gonna leave it there and go one more time for council, and then I want to see if we go to the public. And I see Councilor Harrington. I think I saw Councilor O'Doherty once before that. So I'm going to go to Councilor O'Doherty, Councilor Harrington, and then I'll go back. And then wait, let me go through too, because I'm not sure if I caught hands. Councilor Schuster. All right. So we'll go in those three. We'll go to O'Doherty, Harrington, and then Schuster. And then if anybody else wants to, and if not, then we'll go to the public. All right, Councilmember O'Doherty.
I would just question that the parking spaces are too high. If you look at the development on Mitchell Street, North Mitchell, and those are like buying apartments. They're condominiums, and they have assigned parking. And if you try to visit somebody there, you have to go to the on-street parking pretty much to find a place to park. So I think that's an example of what Councilor Harrington was talking about whether or not we need parking there. And I just would like to have some way to systematically go through these changes. And I think we need to hear from the public, but one of the, so I'll try to stop being long, but one of the issues, I don't understand why we moved jail and government buildings out of where it was and move it to offices. And like, there's so many things here I don't understand that I don't know the best way. I mean, it would take us all night to go through all 43 of the changes or more than all night to go through all 43 changes in this table. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that comment, Councilor O'Doherty. And I'll go ahead and let, go ahead, Mr. Cox. I saw you wanted to respond. I think probably to that specific question about the jail item in the table. So go ahead.
Fair, Council. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the jail and the government offices was part of our fall UDC update about, I guess it's been a year and a half ago when we brought that forward to y'all. And this is just correcting the parking table from that change and moving that in a use table. And so just making chapter 1510 and 1514 match up basically. But yeah, that was it.
No, appreciate that. You. Yeah, appreciate that question and that answer. And I appreciate Councilor O'Doherty's point about when we look at these, and this is just how it is. But these are almost like omnibus planning packages, and there's a lot in them, and it feels like everything needs a lot of attention. And then we talk to you folks from planning, and usually 9 times out of 10, I start to realize that not everything needs granular detail, but there are some things that do. Anyway, I appreciate that. I'm going to go to Councilor Harrington. Actually, Councilor Harrington says this will be your third time. Will you yield to Council Member Schuster? Thank you. Go ahead, Councilor Schuster.
Sorry, I wasn't ready there on the unmute. I thought the other counselor was going before me. 3 different things. I went and saw a friend in a very exclusive neighborhood in a different state even, and they have townhouses all in a row, and yes, there's a parking lot, and in their statute, they're not even allowed to park outside their house at night. All vehicles must be in the garage or in the parking lot 2 blocks away. I don't ever want to see this. I couldn't believe I felt it was such an unfriendly spot. Number two, before COVID, and I hate to say the BC, that sounds terrible that way. BC, we had parking problems issues downtown. Other people say, no, if you circle around long enough, you'll find something. Oh, bull. If you try to go out for a meal in the evening, it was terrible. We have signs up that say no parking on such and such nights, such and such nights, so the street sweepers could go through. We don't enforce that anymore. We have parking issues. And then the last comment I'm going to just go with is issues with the business ones than the public ones. And it's kind of funny how many different lots does the city of Laramie have more or less reserved for them down near City Hall? Because I think the answer is 3. So I think it's kind of funny we're saying we need less parking, and we have 3 different lots we use for parking just for our own employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Schuster. Council Member Harrington, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
Follow
Mayor.
that one up. Follow that one up.
I don't know that I can. I would just say maybe since it sounds to me like planning is looking for some sort of feedback, I would certainly support revisiting the residential component of this in a more holistic way. I feel like this maybe will, my sense is that this is not going to do a lot for affordability of sort of if you are moving your company here, you're likely moving young professionals, and I'm not sure they're looking for like studio apartments. So I would like to have a bigger conversation about that. To me, some of this stuff feels hard to track, why each change has happened. And that's a critique more of the commercial side. I guess I'm having a hard time identifying like the economic value of going from 500 square feet to 1,000 square feet per parking spot for a specific use, or how that determination was made. So I maybe on the next consideration of this would like, at least if we're going to go through item by item through the commercial, I would like some of that information. It's kind of hard to make these decisions without sort of like the knowledge that the two of you have in your brains, without imparting some of that onto us, as far as the specific rationale for each change. And that's it, Mr. Mayor. I'm moving on. I'll quit raising my hand.
Harrington, you're fine. This is an in-depth discussion meeting for this item because we figured it would garner some. The city manager is looking for the floor. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. I just felt like it might be important to clarify the point with respect to the city's parking lots around City Hall, only because I don't want any misperception in the public. We have 3 lots surrounding City Hall. We have the lot directly across from City Hall on Ivinson Street, which is shared parking. There are some time restrictions during the day, restricted for city staff under a lease agreement with the Masonic Temple, but in the evening, the lot becomes available back to its owner, the Masonic Temple, and then of course the American Legion share it with us during the day and also the evening. Then we have a second lot at 4th and University, which was city-only parking, and I think that's probably what Councilor Schuster is remembering. But I wanted to be clear that probably 6 or 7 years ago, I lifted the restrictions on that parking lot to make it available to the general public for any purpose every hour of the day. And then our third lot, which lies on Grand Avenue next to the City Hall Carnegie Annex, that is about the 4.5 block of Grand Avenue. The north side of that lot, and I think it's approximately 7 spaces, is restricted for city staff. But we do have an agreement with the bike shop across the street that makes the southern portion of that lot always reserved for private business use. So there is some time restrictions, but in general, all 3 of our lots are now available for public and business use, depending on the lease arrangements that we have.
Thank you, City Manager, and I appreciate that, and I understand the clarification. And I also believe that the good council members' comment was more rhetorical point about a need for parking than trying to say that the city didn't need parking. But both points well taken, and clarifications appreciated. I'd like to go to the public, but those of you that have only chimed in once, members of the council, if you wanna let me know before we do that you have something you need to say before we go to the public. Otherwise, I'll ask the well, I'll go to the staff and see. Did you have a chance to get to questions so far? Okay, got a thumbs up. And okay, maybe we'll go to the public now, and I'll ask the city clerk if we have anybody that wants to provide public comment.
Mr. Mayor, Brett Glass.
All right, let's go ahead and recognize Brett Glass, and you have the floor, Mr. Glass, when you pop into the gallery here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't see myself in the gallery. Is it possible to be visible?
I'm not certain. I don't have control on that end of it, but we can hear you just fine, and we see your name on your box.
I see. Okay, well, for the following item, I would actually like to be visible because I have some things to show. For this one, it's not as important, but I would like to ask that, if I can be. In any case,
Mr. Glass, just quickly to facilitate that, I would say if you have something, you can email it to the city clerk, like we would have a member of the public do in a regular meeting. They're welcome to pass an item on to the city clerk, and we'll see if we can have it displayed on a shared screen. I apologize for the interruption. Go ahead, Mr. Glass.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Yes, also it's nice to be able to see facial expressions and see who's there. But in any case, just quickly on this item, there are a couple of things that are a concern in the text amendments to the or proposed text amendments to the UDC. Section 2, it says. Properties located within the DC zoning district shall be exempt from minimum parking requirements unless otherwise provided for in that district. That's a big concern. One thing we're seeing here is that apparently, most of the letters of support are coming from a lobbying group, which is part of the Chamber of Commerce, and this is a private group within a private group that consists of builders. And I do not know what's in the offing in terms of plans for, say, scrape-offs and developments in downtown, but this makes me really concerned because downtown is one of the places where we have a parking crisis, and yet it seems to be the place that would be the most impacted by these changes in terms of having less parking. So I'm very concerned about that. I think we really do need to take a good look at downtown before we make any changes which might impact it further. Let's see, Section 5. Off-street vehicle parking spaces shall not be provided in an amount that is more than 110% of the minimum. This really hems people in. If they want to provide more parking, if a business wants to, if it has a business model where more people are coming in and out, if someone simply wants things to be more convenient, and by the way, it eliminates commercial or industrial uses. That's struck out in Section 5 in this. So it would be for all categories. You couldn't even provide more parking in a residential situation, which is a very serious problem now for residents downtown and in many other places. This hems people in at the high end, and it seems to be very prejudiced against providing adequate parking. Now, we've already noted that in the attachments, there's the requirements for single-family residences are quite low. Now, single-family residences at least usually have garages, but the multifamily ones generally do not. And there we have there we have a reduction that would really cause parking to flow onto the street. We already see this in some neighborhoods. A good example is Beach Street, if you're aware of where that is behind Walmart, where people are already not only parking on the street, but filling the street to the extent where they have to cruise around to find more parking. But we don't want to have more situations like that. Now, as to the cost of housing, land in Laramie is not expensive, especially relative to other places. The most expensive things here are building materials and the actual cost of building. If you just take a look at the assessments, you will see that in the assessor's record, the assessments for your own property, you will see that. Less parking may increase profits for developers, but it is not going to drive down the cost of housing because that's not where most of the costs lie. Another thing to take note of is that we are a university town. We need more parking per unit, not less, because we have a lot of people who are piling in to apartments. A 2 or 3 bedroom apartment that might be a family where the kids don't drive. In someplace else will be packed with students where every one of them has a car. So we really need to make sure that we have that we have requirements that are a practical minimum, and certainly are liberal at the high end, so that we allow for more parking where it's needed, because it's going to be needed. In any case, that's mainly what I have to say. I think some of the other councilors have also expressed the same skepticism I have about other items. I really recommend that this be voted down and sent back to the drawing board for further discussion, especially after we see some empirical results from studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. City Clerk, do we have other folks that would like to make public comment right now?
We do, Mr. Mayor. We have Jerry Gruber.
All right. Welcome. And once I see you have joined us in the gallery, all right, Mr. Gruber, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I'm Jerry Gruber. I'm a new resident to Wyoming and to Laramie. I escaped from Colorado after 56 years in Colorado. And I'd like to share some of the experiences that I've seen in Colorado, having been there such a long time. You look at downtown Boulder, downtown Denver, Southlands Mall, all of those areas were developed with high density. And what they did was they took down the parking and they put up the buildings. They made apartments, they made condos, they made office complexes. And now what is the problem? There's no place to park. I don't go downtown Denver anymore, because if I go down Denver for even an evening function, it costs me $50 to park. And if you can find a parking space. Southlands Mall, which is off of E470 on the east side of town, beautiful area. They made a lot of really nice shops downtown, but what they did above those is they put in office condos. And now you go downtown Southlands and you can't find a place to park. And people don't want to go places that they have to drive around the block 15 times to find a place to park, whether they're going to go to the movies or they're going to go to dinner, excuse me. One thing that I have not heard addressed is, if you increase the density of downtown Laramie, what's that going to do to the traffic issue? To me, what I've seen so far is one left lane turn arrow, period, and that's at Grand and 3rd Avenue. What's that going to do to the traffic downtown? I don't personally believe that housing should be downtown. As the other gentleman mentioned, there's other areas that are out that I think would be more suitable for dense housing than right downtown Laramie, because of the traffic issues, the parking issues, and everything else. What about the storefronts? And that's probably another issue that's coming up. The increase of downtown for the 7 stories, which I think is totally ridiculous, but I think that's another conversation for another item on your agenda. But thank you very much for giving me the time to express my opinion.
You are welcome, sir, and thank you for your patience and waiting for us to get to the public comment period on the item. And we appreciate your sharing your views with us this evening. City Clerk, do we have other public comment?
We do. We have Steve Grabowski, Mayor.
Oh, Mr. Grabowski, welcome, and you have the floor.
Okay, I was just asked to unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. You have the floor. Go right ahead.
Okay, I had a lot of notes on parking, but I'm going to save keep my powder dry and save it mostly for the other item. I've heard comments about how many parking lots are empty. You have to consider the time of day. If you're looking at a residential parking lot in the daytime when people are going to class or they're going to work, you're going to see those parking lots empty. You should go see them at night when people are actually home. It makes a huge difference. Same thing downtown. Usually in the morning before it gets close to lunch, usually you can park downtown. This morning, I had an older person come to my store, had to walk 2 blocks. Unfortunately, this person was able, but many of my customers are in their 80s and 90s. They're on their walkers, they're in their wheelchairs, and they have to come a long ways. That's really difficult for them. And when downtown is completely full in the afternoons and in the evenings, and if you try to shop down here on a Sunday, it's ridiculous. I keep hearing these comments that there's no parking problem downtown. That is absolutely against the facts. So that's a problem for the elderly especially. And if we're really concerned about the elderly and the ADA and everything else, that should be taken into consideration. The other thing I run into is in a previous discussion we had with staff, we were told that what we are doing now is preparing for the autonomous vehicle. We'll no longer have cars. They will have an autonomous vehicle that will come pick you up with no driver and deliver you to your destination. That's a little tough for Wyoming when people come here for the out of doors. They come here for the hunting, they come here for the fishing and everything else. Makes it really difficult. We're being told ahead of time before these vehicles are even developed that we're going to be forced into them. That's quite the agenda. This stuff comes down from people in big cities who've been ruined already. They're forcing the affluent out of town to come out in the hinterland here, and now we're going to force the slums to follow them. That's my comment for this evening. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Grabowski, thanks for your patience in waiting to make your comments and for sharing your views with the council. City Clerk, do we have another public comment?
We do, Mr. Mayor. We have Tom.
All right. Sir, I see you on the screen. If you could please just give us just your full name for the record, and you have the floor, sir. Thank you for your patience. Is it Mr. Mattamore?
I believe it is.
Okay, Mr. Mattamore, whenever you're ready, you have the floor. I think you can, if you're on the phone, you can hit *6, and then we'll be able to hear you. We'll give Mr. Mattamore a second, folks. The challenges of the remote meeting.
Mr. Mayor, point of information, it may be that the request from the clerk that says to unmute your mic may be hidden behind a window and on his screen.
Thank you for that point of information, Counselor. Sometimes if you wiggle the cursor around on the Zoom screen, you'll see those little controls at the bottom if you have the Zoom menu and window open. Thank you for that.
Tom, we see that you're unmuted.
Mayor, Council, being in other Zoom meetings with Mr. Mattamore, he tends to also have phone calls along with his Zoom. So there might be a number in there as well that might be, oh, boom.
He's working on it. Thank you, Mr. Cox. Appreciate that, and for looking out so people can make their comment. If Mr. Mattamore is on the line, he's got the floor. Thank you for your patience.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Excellent. My point is that I need to dispute the actual fact that when a developer builds a apartment complex or a fourplex, that parking is a major requirement for him, and that could be either make or break the deal. I worked for Pacific Realty and Development in the 1970s. We built 15,000 units of apartments a year. There were many factors that the developer, as a developer, that we looked at in the number of units that go on a site. And it's drainage, it's roadways required, it's parking spaces, and landscaping. Parking spaces is just one of many factors that go into determining how many units. Then you also have to take into account marketing. the number of units will also be dependent on, can you sell those units? There's no point in building 360 unit apartment projects if your marketing people feel they can only rent 200. So parking spaces are not the be all and end all for developing a project. That's my biggest dispute with the basic premise that you need to reduce parking, and that will bring in more development. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And thanks for your patience with my silly phone.
Not a problem at all. And thank you for your patience with our format. And we appreciate you sticking with us so that you could share your public comment. We do appreciate it. And we're glad to have you here. All right. City Clerk, do we have anybody else?
Mr. Mayor, it appears that the phone number we had was Mr. Mattimore. So
Okay.
that is all the hands that I see raised.
Okay. All right. So we've had a round of public comment for us to consider. I would bounce it back now to the council or staff for wrapping this item up. Last comments. I think much like a work session, one of the things we wanted to achieve with the special meeting this evening on this topic was to give a general sense about where we might want to go and some of the main concerns, and also to hear from our staff some thoughts and ideas they had about how we might, different approaches we might take with a policy like this going forward. So with an eye towards wrapping it up that way, council, anything else on this item? All right, Mr. Teeny, I see you.
Yeah, Council, I just wanted to make a couple quick clarity points. One on the comment regarding section 2 in the ordinance. Just to be clear, all we're doing in this amendment here is changing the poorly worded existing code, which says "are," and making it "shall be." It's just good. It's just better legal language to use. This already exists in code. All properties located within downtown commercial district are already exempt from the parking standards found in this section of code. And the downtown commercial code has its own parking requirements for commercial, which is 0. There's no parking requirements. And for residential, there's two variables, but it's a drastically reduced amount. So that's all I was going to point out of that. Really, it doesn't change the context. If you were to strike it, it would still, same thing would basically still occur. We are just making the language be a shall be instead of an are. And then section 5, I know Member Doherty has brought this up a couple times. You know, I'll say that the 110% versus 125% I don't think is worthwhile to get hung up on, to be honest with you. You know, if we feel as council feels that 125% is fine and you're comfortable with increasing parking and allowing people to increase parking, I don't think that that's consequential to the overall goal of what we're trying to achieve here. So the other thing I would note in section 5, staff at the next reading will bring forward something to replace the struck out language, which is categorized as a commercial or industrial use. When Member Doherty brought this up, I think at the first reading when we were talking about it, we were examining the language as well. And I think through that commentary, we're going to provide an alternative, I think, that helps us kind of bring that section back together. But that'll come when you guys are considering amendments. So that's all I was going to mention on the public comments. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Teeny, for adding some comments there. And I think it just further speaks to sort of the ins and outs and the layers of things that are involved in what we're considering tonight. Council members, before we close this one out and move on, go ahead, Council Member Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just really briefly, because we have all these this special meeting, I just wanted to note for the public that this comes back on February 16th. just so that it's clear, since most of them are probably in the room that may have another comment.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. Councilmember Gabriel, did you want to make a comment? Oh, turn your microphone on. That's all right. We all do it, Councilmember Gabriel. Oh, one more. Yeah, there you go. You've got it.
One more time. I think everything's been covered. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I didn't know if you were switching on to let me know you had something for us. That's all right.
I understand. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Councilmember O'Doherty.
Do we need a motion to close this discussion? I don't know how that works, the parliamentary procedure. No.
I don't think so. And I see the city clerk verifying that we do not. I was going to say one last thing about this, and then I think maybe we'll take a very short break just so people can stretch their legs if they haven't already done it. And that's just this. What I think is challenging for members of the council and the staff on an item like this is I think our planning department has professional planners in it who have a job that says they need to try to bring planning items forward that are forecast. In other words, they're looking for things not just now and not just in 20 years, maybe 30 years, and then trying to gauge when is the best timing for those and how to implement them. And I think for the council members, what's difficult is we're trying to go from that 30,000 foot policy level for setting policy and planning along with long range policy like that, while also representing not only our own comfort level and palatability with certain things, but also reflect as nearly we can current constituency feeling on that. And those things are often not in harmony. So that's why these conversations are difficult and take a lot of time. I'm hopeful that we'll receive some more feedback between now and the next time we take a look at this and start voting on amendments. But I really appreciate the discussion and the flexibility and everybody's thoughts. Good points around, and we'll see where this takes us. I think we did need to have this discussion, so I appreciate it. Can we, without objection, just take a few minutes, and then we'll 2 or maybe 3-4 minutes, and then we'll reconvene for the next item on the special meeting agenda. All right. Thanks, everybody. see. Councilor Doherty is back, but Councilor Doherty, so far it's just you and me. That's okay. We'll give people another minute or two. Councilor Harrington. And thanks, folks. It could be that it's just Paul Weaver that needed a break because I hadn't been able to turn off the screen maybe and go take that break earlier. So if it was just for me, thank you very much. Let's call this meeting back to order and go on to the second item on our agenda for our special meeting this evening, which is an introduction and first reading for original ordinance number 2023. And City Clerk, we'll have you read that in if we could.
Mr. Mayor, we have original ordinance number 2023, amending sections of Title 15.08 and 15.14 of Laramie Municipal Code regarding downtown commercial zoning district regulations.
Thank you very much, City Clerk. And we're going to need someone to bring this in as an item. And I don't have, since it's a first reading, I'm going to need a council member to volunteer to move the item forward, I think, so that we can have an introduction from Mr. Feaser. Councilmember Harrington, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve original ordinance number 2023 as recommended by the Planning Commission on first reading in accordance with findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Second.
The first, a motion that is by Councilmember Harrington and a second by Vice Mayor Pierce. And I have Assistant City Manager Feaser as bringing this in. I don't see him on our, I see Mr. Cox is ready to go with it. You're going to do the introduction on the item for us. Thank you. So go ahead.
Mayor, Council, thank you so much. Bear with me through this as we do have a few new council members that weren't on at the original reading of this ordinance. And there's been a lot that has happened since the first, or I guess third reading back in the summer when we split it. Background, the reason we're bringing forward these DC text amendments, all in all, these are all brought together as different items, but all together creates a product that we want for our downtown and that we have seen to be productive in our downtown as well as other downtowns around the region and nation and global. A lot of these are focused around, or most of them are focused around economic development and ensuring that we kind of sustain the same pattern that we have within the core of our downtown that people do love so much and that visitors do come from or come to because they appreciate it. But as well as some historic design standards that we have found through an adopted plan that Main Street adopted back in like 2011 or so. But back at Council's August 4th reading, it was the height of COVID. No one knew kind of what the economic struggles were going to be. And what Council did was they split the ordinance into basically the contentious items and the items that everybody agreed with. And so the ones that were approved on third reading were patio design, essentially ensuring that we don't get another Shocktoberfest in our downtown area. 2 is signage size for protruding signs in our downtown, allowing a larger, kind of more historic size of signs in the downtown. And, oh geez, I am blanking on the...
That's all right, Mr. Cox. I'm gonna give you a moment to remember, because I'm also, before I'm reminded, ask that the members of the City Council give an affirmative that this is brought to the floor for first reading by unanimous consent. All in favor say aye or indicate by a raise of the hand.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Cox. We helped each other out there.
Perfect, thank you. And the third was just not allowing temporary banners downtown. And these were passed unanimously, but the other more contentious ones were postponed until February 2nd by a vote of 5-4. And so we realize these are very kind of difficult kind of changes within the code to swallow. But since then, council had asked that city staff and Main Street kind of do a much larger public engagement effort with downtown business owners, building owners, and just people that are interested in the downtown. And kind of the combination of all that was during the first reading of all the ordinances together, we sent letters to every building owner within the downtown, just through our kind of GIS database, informing them of all the changes. And then after this reading, that was kind of the start of the full public engagement effort. Staff in Laramie Main Street created an FAQ sheet, or frequently asked questions, to kind of combat some of the rumors and falsities that have been going around downtown, and to almost try and calm some of the concerns that were happening. This FAQ sheet is attached to your packet, and along with the FAQ sheet was 4 scheduled Zoom meetings, of which were open to the public. Main Street and staff tried to tape FAQ sheets to everybody's property, every storefront, every house, store, any building that was in the DC district. Unfortunately, whether it was the wind or just someone forgot a door, we missed a couple folks, but those folks that were missed were sent FAQ sheets later through email or were delivered again. After this FAQ sheet was passed out, staff did receive 2 emails, one concerned about building height and one concerned about the stucco ordinance. Staff answered their questions and kind of explaining why the stucco and why the building height, of which the building height does not affect any existing building within the downtown, but only new construction and new development. And the stucco was because historically we had not had any stucco buildings originally to the downtown district. This was more or less a material that was brought back in the 30s or 40s. But it was historically in residential structures within all of Laramie. Since then, or after the FAQ sheets were passed out and the emails were sent, we also had the 4 Zoom meetings that were posted on the FAQ sheet. Of those 4 Zoom meetings, in total, we had 8 members of the public join and ask questions and have some spirited conversations around these. And many of the concerns were around parking problems, windows affecting existing buildings, taking away the historic character, allowing low-income housing within downtown, and building height taking away from kind of the historic character, allowing large, taller buildings in our downtown area. Since the public engagement effort, staff did receive a letter of support from Main Street, but this letter of support stated that they did not believe now was the right time to bring forward these changes due to the economic burdens that COVID brings. Staff does not agree with this statement. We believe that right now is the right time to put these in before development is proposed. Through COVID, we have not seen any slowdown of investment within Laramie, and that stands for the downtown district as well. We have seen many buildings being revamped, many storefronts adding new windows, brick, painting, just a lot of investment in private property within the DC area. And because of this, we haven't seen a need to hold these, because we do want the most efficient and built development that will also continue the pattern and continue the feel that we do love about our downtown. But because of these concerns, staff has decided to recommend to council that we remove 2 of these amendments from the ordinance. The 2 that we recommend removing are the transparency ordinance that requires 70% on the ground floor and 50% linearly on every floor above there, as well as the building materials and more specifically the stucco that was included in the table in y'all's packet. The main reason there is because these specifically have the possibility of affecting existing buildings within the downtown. The only way that these would affect buildings downtown is by a use level change of 2 or an addition of 20% of the use area for a building, which are both very difficult to occur in our downtown because of the permitted uses within our downtown typically fall within 2 use levels of our use table. I realize this is getting in depth and am happy to talk about the kind of difficulty of understanding this portion of the code. But staff does believe these ordinances are very important to create a good, active public realm within our DC district. And while we are recommending that they come off the table now, we do hope that we can bring them forward to you all sometime in a later date when the world isn't all topsy-turvy and whatnot. And so the other 3 that we are proposing stay. The first one is the building footprint, and this is an ordinance or a text amendment basically requiring that with any lot downtown that 80% of it be filled up by a building. The reason for 80% is as planners, we would love to be as gung-ho as possible and say 100%, but the 20% there also allows for a row of parking in the back or anywhere else that you don't put your building. We measured a majority of the downtown lots, and this 20% does allow for a full parking row wherever you decide to put that with your building. But what this does is allow for good land efficiency within our downtown area, which has a very minimal amount of vacant land left within it. And so we want to ensure that what we do have left is developed in a way that will fully benefit what is around it, offering more space for whether the developer wants to put offices, residential, restaurants, retail, maker space, whatever. The more space that we have, the more uses we can have within this area, contributing to the uses around them. The next is building height, minimum and maximum. We are proposing that, let me back up. Within the cover sheet, you'll see some sample language around the building footprint, and that we are proposing an amendment to our amendment, and that the 80% building footprint would only apply to new construction and new development. And so it would not affect any existing buildings within the downtown. For building height, this as well only applies to new construction and new development, but we are proposing that we require a 30-foot minimum, not 2 stories, but 30 feet. If the developer does not want to do 2 stories, this allows for a versatility of uses that can go into a place that has a 30-foot tall ceiling, whether that's a climbing gym, a brewery, a gymnastics studio, whatever. It allows for that alteration and also easier renovation for if someone does want to put in a 2nd story after the original owner. But the whole goal is to allow for more space for more uses within an already dense community of our overall city. We are also proposing that there be an 80-foot maximum for buildings for all of downtown. The current code only allows a building, say a new construction building, to go 1 story higher than a building, the tallest building on its block. And so for most of downtown, that might only be 3 or 4 stories, but then for, let's say, Grand Avenue between 3rd and 2nd, that would allow for 80 feet. And so we don't want to prohibit a developer who does want to put in that many, whether it's residential, office, whatever, if he can, to be allowed to construct something that brings a building of that size to our downtown. We did take the 80 feet from measuring the tallest building within downtown, which is the Wagner at 70 feet, and just went essentially 1 story taller than that. We are also proposing that we get rid of the maximum building size, which within code, it doesn't allow a building to be larger than 60-something thousand square feet, which would be very difficult to actually get something that large. But if there is an ability to do that, we also don't want to prohibit that. It should also be noted that the DC district is the only district within our whole city that has a building height association with an already built building. And so whether it's R3, B2, any other zoning district, they can already just go up to their full building height without having to actually be associated with another building on their block. It's only our downtown area that is prohibited in that way. The third is residential parking requirements. We're proposing that we get rid of residential parking within the downtown area fully. The commercial parking is already not required within our downtown. If you have any type of commercial, retail, restaurant, whatever, you don't have to provide any parking. That is one, because our downtown is so dense and it is a pedestrian oriented area, but to provide parking within these lots that are so small, it does take away from whether it's a building owner, developer, whoever, to actually fully take advantage of their downtown lot. If they want to expand, if they want to increase the building in height or whatever. But also for many of our buildings downtown, they want to convert their second story, third story into residential spaces. Whether you do or don't, this code right now does prohibit them from converting that second or third story into a residential space. Many of our buildings are built out to 100% of their lot, and they would either have to get a variance or cut out a portion of their building to allow parking, which just is a huge deterrent for anybody wanting to provide residential spaces within our downtown. Within the whether it's within the Thrive Laramie Economic Development Plan, it does call for 300 housing units within our DC district as it currently stands today. And so we're hoping a code like this does allow for some of those units to start being kind of niched off from that 300 so we can get close to that goal. The other part is our current residential parking standards are extremely low as they are within the DC district. Right now, the DC district, whatever residential parking requirements you have outside of the DC district, it is decreased by 75% as soon as you develop within there. So if you have a requirement of 10 parking spaces as you develop now, you go to DC, it gets cut to 2.5. But then if you're also within 600 some odd feet of a public parking lot, that is decreased again by 50%. And so at that point, you're down to 1.25 spaces when you're originally at 10. This is not, like we've said in the previous item, parking is a massive, or we believe it's a massive deterrent for affordable housing. And that stands even more true for the downtown when you have very small lots compared to a lot of our kind of periphery areas around the town. Where one parking space could be, if you can build up vertically in the downtown, that could take away 4 or 5 studio apartments, of which studies have found through community builders that residential units bring much more retail profit than any parking space could. With that, I'll go through, we have also received a number of other support letters for these changes. National Main Street has supported these, showing that it is good practice within most Main Street areas. We do have Main Street's letter. While Main Street doesn't believe it's a good time at the moment, they do agree that these are good amendments to have within the city. The other is Cascadia Architects, which is partners with community builders who we have been working with on our housing study. And they have also proposed, as part of our kind of that draft report that you saw a little bit today, that we increase our building height to 80 feet, but as well as get rid of all residential parking standards within the downtown district. So they do support these fully. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Sorry for the long report. It's been a very long project, but I am here for any questions that you may have.
Thank you for the introduction. Council Member O'Doherty.
Yeah, I have a question. The cover sheet said that the staff was also recommending removing sections 1 and 2. The amendments proposed in 1 said 1, 2, 3, and 5, unless I'm reading this wrong. So is there something I'm missing? Thank you.
It's a point of information question. We'll give folks a second to get us an answer, and I'll look around for. Go ahead, Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Councilor O'Doherty, you are correct. Section 1, DC design standards, that all is kind of dealing with the materials, stucco and natural wood in that table that you see. And so sections 1, 2, and 3 are all dealing with materials. And so, sorry I wasn't clear enough on that, but anything dealing with materials or transparency, we are taking out, or we are recommending that we take out.
That will need to be offered as an amendment when we get there. Council Member Gabriel.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just curious, Matthew, if you could address a little bit more about the delay from Main Street, if there was a date specific that they talked about. And I was just curious also about, it seemed like they would have the pulse perhaps of the downtown business philosophy concerning these changes in mind when they talked about a delay. And maybe it would be, adverse to businesses at this point. And if you would maybe address that a little bit, or did they talk about what kind of delay they were thinking about?
Mayor, Council, Main Street did not give any kind of date-specific time to bring these back. As far as kind of the feeling around downtown around these, at staff level, we heard from those 8 members in the Zoom meetings, as well as maybe 2 or 3 others, and just having conversations on the street, just shopping around downtown and stuff. As far as what Main Street has heard, I would leave that to Trey to answer if she's on the call, but I don't really have an answer around that one.
Great, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Gabriel. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended several of those Zoom meetings with Mr. Cox, and I will say, just for council's knowledge, the city and Main Street put in a considerable amount of time and energy into hearing from the public on this item. And I just want you all to know that. But I think one of the things in those meetings that was heard often was the preservation of the character of our downtown. That seemed to come up over and over and over again, and for good reason. I mean, we have a pretty tremendous downtown. One of the things that I think was a bit controversial, and to me always seemed sort of counter to that opinion, and I'm wondering if planning department or any of you feel the same way, was in a lot of ways the limitation of an 80-foot building. That building could be built starting tomorrow on that block that Mr. Cox mentioned, but capping it at 80 feet to me felt more conservative as far as planning for the future than just leaving it as one story above the tallest building on the block. I mean, we can all foresee the future of somebody builds the building that is 80 feet, and then all of a sudden it's 90 and 100 and 110, and then in 10 years we're looking at far taller buildings. So in my mind, I wanted to, I want to make sure that I'm understanding that correctly from the planning department, because to me that felt like a really logical way to sort of limit the height to just slightly taller than the tallest building we already have in our downtown district. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead with an answer if you want to speak to that, Mr. Cox.
Mayor, Council, not really much of an answer, but
okay, that's fine. Oh, I just wanted to give you an opportunity there. Other council comments and questions?
Point of information.
Point of
Mr.
information.
Mayor.
Yes.
I noticed that Rin Casco is among the attendees, and so she may be able to address the Laramie Main Street questions. Okay. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Point of information noted. Council members for questions on this before? Any other? Yep, Councilmember Somerville.
Mr. Mayor, I guess another point of information. I know that Director Sherwood is not available to be with us tonight, but the President, Chaz Avila, is also in the waiting room to speak for Main Street.
I'm sensing a desire to go to folks that are waiting to speak to us, so we'll do that if there isn't anybody that wants to add anything else right now. And I would just ask the city clerk to line us up more or less in order of how people want to speak.
Mr. Mayor, we had received a request ahead of time from Mr. Mattamore.
All right, Mr. Mattamore, we'll give him a second so that he can get on here. I see him and I see the phone, so I think he's ready to go. And you have the floor, sir.
Thank you much, Mayor and Council. I think I've got this phone working now. I've been opposed to this from the beginning, and I think we are making progress. The removal of the transparency requirements is a big deal for existing property owners. I still foresee some serious problems with with the height of buildings. I think what you're going to end up having is people with big money are going to come in, say, I can put in 50 units of apartments on this site that you happen to have Enterprise Rent-A-Car in. He's going to sell out, and we're going to end up with 3rd and 4th Street lined with tall buildings, and we're going to have infrastructure problems. We just finished a big infrastructure for waters downtown. We're going to have structural problems. We're also going to kind of ruin the image of Laramie if we line our main entrance on 3rd Street with multi-story buildings. As far as being close to the railroad tracks, I think if you're going to build them downtown, the place that's going to go away is the Cowboy and possibly MeWe's over there across the street in the old Knight's Garage. Any marginal property downtown on the outskirts of the existing downtown merchants area will be susceptible to putting in numerous multi-story buildings. I think that's going to change the character of downtown Laramie considerably. It could possibly change our main entrance into town on 3rd Street. But I think we're making progress if we can negotiate or work out some kind of an arrangement where you can limit the number of these buildings downtown. I think there's a lot of places in Laramie that you could get a better bang for your buck building a 7-story apartment building with a retail anchor on the bottom, a lot closer to the university where you would have less trouble and worry about parking. But any more residential downtown than what we have right now is going to seriously compete for parking with the existing businesses. And thank you much. That's, you've had all my writings and you know how I have felt about this from the start, but I think we're making progress. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Mattamore, and for taking time to hang in there on the call and provide some views. it's appreciated and recognized by the council here. City Clerk, who's up next?
Mr. Mayor, we have Rin Kowski.
This is Rin Casco, sorry. Hi,
Casco, sorry.
Go ahead.
No worries. Yeah, Mr. Mayor and members of council. So I am a board member with the Laramie Main Street Alliance, and I'm also the chair of the design committee. Me and Mr. Cox has been working on this for the last few months. And so we, as Mr. Cox said, that Laramie Main Street does holistically support all these design standards. But through our process of outreach and working with our business owners, we received a lot of feedback. And due to the economic kind of disparity that's happening due to COVID, we thought that maybe we should step back and see what standards would be the most efficient right now. So we wanted to focus on the ones that encourage new construction, so it's easier to build and more effective to do business downtown, as well as still providing oh my gosh, you got, I will just skip that word, of the design of the district. So yes, we are not going forward with all the standards, but we believe that the standards are still important, especially if we use language that specifies that these standards are for new construction only. And Laramie Main Street Board also supports the building height, the footprint, and the parking and the transparency. So we believe by updating these standards for new construction, we support building entrepreneurs, developers, and investors in growing the diversity of business within the district. So yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm here for any questions.
Thank you, and thank you for being here to represent the Main Street organization. If there isn't any objection, I think I will allow council members to ask the Main Street representative a question if they have one, since that's been offered, and they are one of our partner and contract organizations. Councilmember O'Doherty?
I have a question about when you increase the footprint of a building, we still need a place for trash pickup. And so the dumpsters are in the alleys, and I just see trying to expand the footprint of a building, like being in conflict with that. Do you have some insight? Thank you.
I don't know if that's a question for Main Street or for Mr. Cox, but whoever wants to answer that. And
well,
then
I had Main Street in mind since you heard them.
Yeah. All right.
Mr. Mayor, if I
Yep, go right ahead. You've got the floor.
Unfortunately, I don't have a long answer for that, and I'll probably push it off to Mr. Cox, but I think further developing this idea, and as we continue to go with new projects and new developers, I think we would identify that problem as we continue on and see what the best way it is to have that easy access to the dumpsters, and so then the garbage trucks can come in and such and such. So I think it'd be a future conversation as we develop this more. But Mr. Cox.
Thank you, and we'll just have Matthew put that in the queue for when he responds after we get through this round of public comment, if that works for you, Councilor O'Doherty and Mr. Cox. Great. City Clerk, who else is in the public comment queue for us?
We have Jerry Gruber.
Mr. Gruber, when I see show up here on my screen, there you are, Mr. Gruber, you've got the floor.
Yes, thank you again for listening to me. And as I mentioned prior, I've recently moved here from Colorado, escaping from them. And one of the reasons I moved to Laramie was I like the small town atmosphere. I would hate very much to see downtown Laramie turn into downtown Boulder with all the issues that you have there. I've never heard addressed the additional sewer problems, the additional traffic problems, the additional traffic increase, traffic lights, electrical outage or usage. I see a lot of construction issues, and I am just as a person, as an individual, I would be vehemently opposed to having a lot of residential downtown. I think you would ruin the downtown atmosphere of Wyoming and of Laramie. And I think that's why people are moving here, is for the small town atmosphere. And again, we don't want to look like Boulder. And I understand that, increasing the downtown, we always want it to look beautiful. How about a Western type theme to downtown instead of a Boulder type theme to downtown? Why do we need 7-story buildings with all the wind here? They might blow over, who knows? But I just don't see that as being really what Laramie and what Wyoming is all about. Thank you again for listening to me.
Thank you, sir, and for hanging in there to provide your perspective for us. City Clerk, who's next?
Mr. Mayor, we have Brett Glass.
Okay, Mr. Glass, you've got the floor.
Mayor and members of council, I don't know, I just emailed, as you requested, the city clerk with an image that I was hoping you could display. There we are. Okay.
Thank you, City Clerk.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Glass. Go ahead.
Thank you. Now, this ordinance as it stands is basically consists of the dregs that were left over after everything that people agreed on was approved. And no one who actually has experience with downtown, with actually living there, with actually doing business, approves of this. You have outside lobbying groups and the builders lobbying group approving of it. But if you're downtown, you have experience with things like dumpsters and the logistics of trying to deal with them. You have experience with parking. And really, the people who are residents and business owners downtown are really the ones who have the data on this and can inform you about what's going on. We don't want to see scrape-offs and skyscrapers in Laramie. I am, for better or for worse, I am the unfortunate co-owner of the building you see here. This is looking from the corner of 3rd and Grand, looking approximately northwest. And what you see in front of you is the Wagner building. It was built too tall, really, for downtown. It's the tallest building in downtown. It's 60 feet tall, not 70. They must have included the antenna tower on top, or, the very top there, if they said 70. And to go up to 80 feet would really be awkward. It requires elevators. It's incredibly difficult. There's no, even with a big lot, there's no room to put in adequate parking. And by the way, speaking of parking, you will notice this photo is from 1924 when the building was built. At that time, there was more parking than there is now. If you take a look at that north side of the street, you see they had diagonal parking. They don't have that now. There's now parallel parking on that north side of the street. So believe it or not, there's actually less parking on Grand Avenue on that block now than there was in 1924. And it hurts, and it shows, and people are constantly having trouble with that. It's good that the requirements involving stucco and transparency were eliminated. But the building height requirement, again, doesn't really have any merit. We don't need tall skyscrapers. Right now, the cathedral is the tallest thing in downtown and should remain so. We don't want to change the requirements to allow that. It also might be noted that even in large cities, San Francisco has a 3-story height throughout most of it, and it maintains the character of the neighborhoods. We certainly shouldn't be building things taller than San Francisco. Parking, again, we're unfortunately without it. We've been trying to acquire it. Nothing should be built that's new that puts increased pressure on parking. As for historic character, nothing that remains would improve the historic character of Laramie or preserve it. It would only harm it. So again, what we have left, I think, is everything that we really don't want. And we should seriously look at voting down the remainder. This is a bad time, as people have already mentioned. We already have the pandemic. Businesses are already under a lot of pressure. We shouldn't adopt things which would do harm rather than good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that image. That's a neat photo. I know that wasn't your central point, but I wanted to recognize that. Thank you for sharing that photo with us. City Clerk, do we have another person lined up in the queue for public comment?
Mr. Mayor, we have Steve Grabowski.
All right, and I see him on the screen. Mr. Grabowski, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and council members. I have been in business in downtown Laramie since 1977, going on 44 years. My family's been here since 1874. Been a lot of changes. This town is absolutely, positively world famous, and all the people who live here don't know that. We are very famous for being the birthplace of women's rights and many other things. People come from all over the world to see this place. They don't come to see 7, 8, 9-story buildings. They come to see the vintage Old West Victorian town that we have. I've been told sometimes that that these new standards have to do with keeping the town looking typically like, you know, old-fashioned. Well, why don't we look at the buildings that are there to find out what old-fashioned is, not go to some consultant's worksheet somewhere who hasn't been around. Now, I checked the 15 buildings between Grand and Garfield on 2nd Street. That's from altitude on one end to the knothole on the other. And looking at the standards that we had, I found only one out of those 15 buildings that would not have to be completely remodeled or even torn down and started over. Now, I appreciate that they're making this not to apply to new buildings. That is much appreciated, but the new buildings that will go up will destroy the character of the old town. This will no longer be the famous town that people come to see, which is frankly, that is what brings in the buildings that would save our economy. We have an interstate going through this town, which all the other towns like this don't have. Dodge City doesn't have it. Tombstone doesn't have it. You have to go way out of your way to see these places, but Laramie is right smack there. That is the salvation to our economy. Now, my 1882 building had 5 problems under that old code that would have applied to me, and I would have had to tear it down basically and start over. I don't have to do that anymore, I guess, if this goes the way it's going, but I think the whole thing should be scrapped because those tall buildings are really going to mess things up. We're going to bring in 80-foot buildings with low-income housing without any parking, hundreds of new cars out on the streets taking up the parking that's already non-existent at many times. That will completely destroy downtown's business economy. Sorry if you're from elsewhere, but the history and fame are important. To answer Mr. Harrington, the 80-foot buildings are completely out of character for our Victorian old town. We've been told at times that the changes would help us to be vintage. I think I mentioned that. Now, I want to mention something about Main Street. Main Street is mentioned as representing downtown. It really doesn't. We do not get to vote for Main Street's director or its board of directors. As I understand it, the director appoints the board, and the board elects the director. So there needs to be more consultation with us. We really weren't consulted by the city much at all, and the sheet that we got did really not represent what was actually in the ordinance when I actually read it. I think this needs to be thrown out. We already have standards that tell us how to build, how to keep it looking vintage the way it was. This is history. I think this is part of the cancel culture movement, to get rid of all the old history and bring the slums from the big cities out here into the hinterland, as some want to do, because the affluent are leaving the big cities. We need people who actually work, people who are affluent to come to town, to work in our businesses, to provide jobs for the rest of the people so they don't have to remain low income. With that, I appreciate the changes that have happened, but I think the whole ordinance needs to be thrown out.
Thank you, Mr. Grabowski, and I give you a little extra time to finish up there. Just as a general reminder and respectful reminder for public comment, we like to keep that to 3 minutes. I extended a courtesy there to allow that point to be finished. City Clerk, do we have someone else in the queue?
Mr. Mayor, we have Chaz.
Okay, and is it Avila? Chaz, you've got the floor.
Mr. Mayor and Council, it's Avila.
Very well. Thank you for the correction, and no offense intended. You've got the floor. Go ahead.
No offense taken. I've dealt with it my whole life. First of all, I wanted to take the opportunity to clear up how the board is selected for Laramie Main Street. The board is made up of a volunteer board who make application when vacancies arise on the board, and those that and they are screened by a screening panel made up of stakeholders from the downtown district, and with oversight from Linda Klink from Wyoming Main Street. And then those selectees are moved on to be nominated and voted on and confirmed by the remaining board members, because the board members are not, the seats are not all vacant at once. So just wanted to clear up that misconception. The executive director has no say in the selection of the Main Street Board. The other clarification I wanted to make is in our letter to council. It was not our intention to limit city staff in their pursuit of these design standard changes. I believe it was Councilor Gabriel that had a question about a timeline. We actually weren't suggesting that we postpone implementation of standards, just that we make modification as Mr. Cox has presented today, that the standards apply to new construction, and that was as far as footprint, transparency, height restrictions, and that, like you said, that was all for new development. We did listen to the downtown and the concerns with the building materials and how transparency would affect existing buildings, and are, supportive of the city staff's recommendations on this reading today.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that and that input. City Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, that is all the hands raised that I see from the attendees.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn this back over now. And council members, do we want to go to staff for some overview on some of the things that they've heard, and then back to the council? I'm seeing that that's the direction folks want to go. Matthew, you've got it.
Mayor, Council, thank you so much. I'm going to kind of go down the list that I made. One was preservation of the historic character of our downtown. When creating these ordinances, things such as transparency on ground and second floor, as well as building height and materials, we're all in line with that core that people think of within our downtown. More specifically, I would say between Custer and University and 3rd and 1st. The historically, originally, and currently, most of our buildings in our downtown are 2 stories or more. It's very rare that you actually find a 1-story building within the downtown area. The 80-foot maximum is giving more kind of liberty to developers, but the main thing we want is that we don't use a portion of land within our downtown for a single story that only allows 1 use. The other is that transparency, even though we are brought to you this recommendation tonight, we are very open to talking about transparency. And most of the buildings that you hear about, the core, many of the people who spoke tonight, their buildings have greater than 70% transparency on the ground floor. And we took measurements of these ground floor buildings to actually come up with that percentage. And most of the buildings actually came to 80 or 90% transparency. And so we drew it back a little bit. The 50% linearly on the top is actually what you see in most of downtown, except for some of those that had been covered over by stucco so that brick didn't have to be repointed. But also within the language of the ordinance has that section that talks about kind of historically and culturally significant buildings as well as unique, in which if you do have a building that is unique, such as let's say Alexander's Jewelry or Martindale's or some type of designer building that people have come to know for downtown, that applicant only has to write a letter to Planning Commission, no fee involved, and just says why their building is significant and kind of unique to that area. That also, the language also was kind of created after looking at the corner building at, what is it, Second and Grand, where the paddle house will be going in the future, and one corner or one side of their building meets that 50% linearly well and above. The other building kind of drops down to maybe like 40%, and so that building is extremely important to our downtown. It is a great gateway to that kind of intersection. Let's see. So in terms of the designs that we are proposing, they are actually very in line with what historically has been found within our downtown. Let's see. Infrastructure. This is all going to be reviewed within our departments. If a building is too large and we don't have the infrastructure, the developer will know that well before they ever propose or submit any application. We don't have any, to my knowledge, if an engineer's on, but we haven't had any major concerns with any new development going downtown in terms of sewer capacity or electric lines or anything like that. That's all I know on that. The low-income housing, I'm here to tell you I'm completely against that argument. We do want housing and we do want a diversity of housing within our downtown district. We actually look at the downtown district as a fantastic place for housing. One, because it is close to those amenities that we were kind of speaking of earlier during the parking ordinance. You have Safeway 5 blocks away. You have schools within walking distance on safe streets. 3rd Street, we all know that there is improvements coming to this corridor in the future with the YDOT improvement, hopefully sooner than 2025, but that's what it's looking like at the moment. And so you also have a high density of jobs around there, parks, and so this is a great place for housing, and we do stand by that 300 plus unit that the Thrive Laramie plan calls for. The economic struggle, I do want to point out that all of these ordinances that we are promoting tonight, specifically the building footprint, height, and parking, all will not affect existing buildings except for parking, which would only benefit existing buildings. So there is the timing for this is kind of irrelevant. It doesn't really affect anything that is currently existing within the downtown area. I think that is mostly what I have.
All right. Thank you. To the council for commentary or further questions.
Mayor,
Councilmember O'Doherty.
I wonder if this is a good time to raise the amendments that are on our cover sheet.
council members, you've heard the first reading, and we've discussed it. We've heard public comment, and we have heard input afterward, more and further information. Do we want to get into the discussion of amendments on the first reading? The way to determine that is, I suppose, to see if council members want to second what I suspect is Councilmember O'Doherty's forthcoming motions. Councilmember O'Doherty, back to you.
Yeah, I move to approve the removal of sections 1, 2, 3, and 5 from ordinance 2023, removing the transparency and building material requirements.
Second.
It's a motion and a second from Councilmember Somerville. Let's, Councilmember O'Doherty, if you can, for the benefit of the council, a statement of those of that amendment.
So it's to remove the section in the original proposal, to remove sections 1, 2, and 3, and section 5. And so those are the sections that Mr. Cox just referred to as affecting the building materials and the transparency. So I would propose that we remove changes proposed in those sections 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Thank you. And point of information that I'd like to get from the planner is, were those under the umbrella of design standards? Did I hear you reference them under that term?
Mayor, Council, I'd say all of these amendments are under design standards, but in terms of the more, I guess, aesthetic ones that we were going after, these would be, yeah.
Thanks, and I appreciate that. The reason I ask is just so to try to bring as much clarity as we get back into the discussion as we can. So this is talking about some of the materials and also the percentages of window, I think we're talking about when we talk about transparency. Discussion on the amendment. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support these amendments. I think the public is, it'll help, I guess, the way I would say that these amendments are going to help speed up the process on second reading when we know our meeting will already be quite busy. So for that reason, I think this is appropriate to consider these on first reading rather than hold them for second. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. Looking to other council members for input on the amendments, discussion. All right. I'm not seeing any, so we will go to a roll call vote. Well, I'm going to stop and give folks an opportunity from the public to comment on amendments. I'll give that a second.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, City Clerk.
I see no hands raised.
All right. I think it could be the case that people have felt like they've been already able to weigh in on some of this. Let's go to the roll call.
Cumby.
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Stalder.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
Gabriel.
Yes.
O'Doherty.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
The amendment carries. So now we're back on our main motion. And for the sake of wrapping up our special meeting tonight, I'm just going to say the question now, we've heard the first reading, we've approved amendments, but the question now is if we want to advance this to the second reading. And we've had a fairly robust discussion and received public comment information on it, but I'll give you another crack at it, council members, before we go to the vote, if you're ready for the vote. Mr. Cox? turn on the sound for us. There you go. Thank you.
Mayor, Council, sorry, I just have a question for Council or Clerk. If this does approve the second reading, would this be on the 16th and be the public hearing, I guess? Or would it be moved to like the March 2nd? Or I forget what the first meeting in March is.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. According to the agenda that was set, sorry, I had to remind myself what we had talked about. I believe second reading goes to the 24th of February, and third reading would then be on the 2nd of March.
And City Clerk.
Actually, correction, public hearing would be on the 2nd of March with the third reading because of our timing of notification for the public hearing.
Thank you. And council members, I believe that allows the public an opportunity to communicate with us on the amended version of this before it passes or does not pass. All right. Are we ready for the vote? Let's have the roll call vote on the motion as amended.
Somerville.
Yes.
Stoller.
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
O'Doherty.
No.
Schuster.
No.
Cumby.
No.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Weaver.
No.
Mr. Mayor, that's 5 yeses and 4 noes.
That motion carries and will be on second reading on the 24th with a third reading and public hearing March 2nd. That is the conclusion of our agenda items for this evening. For the special meeting, we have not included on the agenda time for non-agenda public comment for a second round. I suppose in sticking with our general format, we need to, City Clerk. I'll go ahead and say that we need to. That's not a decision you have to make. If there's public comment now on non-agenda items, we will take it.
I see none, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Schuster, it's that magic hour, sir.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for making time for the special meeting.
epic adventures start in Laramie, Wyoming. Surround your family with alpine vistas and high plains legends. And take a front seat to see the real West. Pristine wilderness adventures and relaxing with the best that nature has to offer makes hospitality a way of life. Laramie, Wyoming. That's why.
Get that four-wheeling, senses reeling, natural feeling. It's that time of year again. Time to unplug and connect with the great outdoors. This fall, bring your 4x4 to Laramie, Wyoming. Or rent a 4x4 and spend your autumn in awe. Plan your trip at visitlaramie.org. Laramie, Wyoming. That's why.